And we ask you to bless our intent this day. Father, we thank you for governance. And we stand before you and we humble ourselves before we do the business of the people. We ask you to guide our thoughts, our speech, our foots, and enable us to do things that are right in the name of the people and to your honor and your glory. Bless this parliament, this house, the upper and the lower. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven,
Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
they were included now. They need to try that topic more often. Turn around. People think here.
That's it.
And after me, you. For those of us who need it most, let us lead. Good morning, my brother Chaplain. We understand the issues that you were having in getting here this morning, but you were ably assisted by your fellow minister in Christ, the member for Pinewood, who assisted us in leading us before the throne of grace this morning. And we thank him for that, and we thank God that he was able to bring you here as well. Honorable members, when the business of this house suspended yesterday evening, we were at second reading and committal of bills. Further, second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise to give a contribution on the two bills that we will debate as a compendium, and that is the Companies Amendment Bill 2019 and the Securities Industry Amendment Bill 2019. I rise on behalf of the wonderful people of East Grand Bahama, who I have the honor and privilege to represent. And I want to congratulate at the outset the committee for the 21st Annual Pelican Point Coconut Festival, which was a resounding success. It continues to grow from year to year, and certainly becoming a signature event on the calendar in Grand Bahama, and I dare say in the country, as we are noticing a very appreciative increase in the number of visitors from other parts of the Bahamas as well as from international. And so we are certainly want to congratulate Ms. Kathy Lang and the committee from the Falcon Point community who continue to put on that festival and a wonderful display of Bahamian culture and our talents. I'd like to express condolences to Mr. Gladstone Russell, the Chief Counselor in Sweetings Key District, on the passing of his father. Certainly, they have made their contribution to that community. Likewise, it seems to be Sweetings Key period on the passing of Miss Ida Mae Feaster, again, a lady who has contributed to that community and worked very hard. And so we certainly want to remember them today and as they'll be funeralized this weekend and in the weeks to come. Hopefully we don't get like Spanish Wells where we have one a day, one a week. But certainly, and we remember those who have passed in Spanish Wells. We recognize the challenge that community faces with facilities, and I can assure them that the Prime Minister is aware and working on plans to ameliorate that situation as quickly as we can. Mr. Speaker, I rise to address this House on the Securities Industry Amendment Bill 2019, which will be followed by my comments on the Companies Amendment Bill 2019. The government of the Bahamas recognizes the continued need to improve the ease of doing business in the Bahamas. This means achieving this objective includes the creation and enforcement of legislation, policies and procedures that do not impede foreign and direct investment, but rather presents a business-friendly environment which is easily accessible and provides appropriate protection for investors. This is also a means to spur real economic growth through the formation and expansion of businesses and business opportunities. To guide our efforts, there is an annual report published by the World Bank Group that I believe we are all familiar with, the Ease of Doing Business report. To be clear, the ultimate measure of improved ease of business that we seek will be evidenced by increased investments, more business activity, and greater employment and empowerment of Bahamians. The report provides a set of criteria and ratings that highlight where some of the greatest improvements might be achieved. For these reasons, as well as the fact that the jurisdiction's reputation for ease of business will be formulated by means based on the report, the government has made a conscientious effort to delve into the metrics and bring about and encourage changes to improving our rankings and ratings. The Bahamas has realized improvements in its overall ranking and score on the Ease of Doing Business Index in recent years. The country's rankings has improved slightly from 121 in the 2017 report to 119 in the 2018 report, and in the most recent report, 118. Over that period, our ratings or our score has improved from 56.65 to 58.9. The government, however, is actively pursuing a net increase of some 20 points, which would lift the Bahamas dramatically in terms of its rankings on that world list. To make this a reality, one of the prime areas identified where the government could introduce the necessary reforms to both improve the ease of business and our ratings on the report was in the area of protecting minority interests. This has resulted in amendments being recommended across a suite of legislation. These include the proposed amendments to the Companies Act, which we are about to discuss, as well as proposed amendments to the Securities Industries Act in 2011, the corporate governance rules, which were recently published in the Gazette earlier this year, and the recently approved Securities Industry Takeover Rules, which we expect will be published in the Gazette imminently. In addition to the key objectives of improving the Bahamas' ranking in the World Bank's Ease of Doing survey, the bills I'm about to address offer several other international initiatives, such as the principles of the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, and the EU's base erosion and profit shifting initiatives. I emphasize, however, that the amendments all present enhancements to local interests while maintaining the standards imposed through those various international initiatives. Mr. Speaker, the Securities Industry Amendment Bill corrects existing legislative gaps and clarifies ambiguities in the current law. It also updates the governance structure of the Securities Commission. The bill establishes requirements needed to meet international standards and best practices in securities regulation, as established by the International Organization of Securities Commissions, or IOSCO, and addresses certain issues identified in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business survey. The amendments are therefore critical to the ongoing development of the securities industry and its regulatory framework. With an understanding of the impetus for the amendments to the legislation, allow me now to discuss the major changes that the bill will introduce. Mr. Speaker, You'll be aware that this Honorable House very recently debated and passed the new Investments Fund Bill, developed to replace and repeal the Investments Funds Act of 2003. One of the achievements of that act was to establish a wholly separate regulatory regime relevant to investment funds that can stand on its own, separate and apart from the regulatory framework established for capital markets in the Securities Industries Act. To address overlaps resulting from the passage of the Investment Funds Act 2019, the Commission must now repeal those provisions in the current Securities Industry Act of 2011 that also affects or apply to the investment fund industry. Various provisions in this bill address changes to definitions and other substantive provisions to ensure that there is no such overlap between these two pieces of legislation. The bill further ensures that where the Investment Funds Act must be referenced, the application is clear. These amendments include adjusting references to securities laws, which include investment fund laws, to securities legislation, which will now include investment funds or parties related thereto when used in the bill. For clarity, Mr. Speaker, I advise that the provisions that relate to the structure and operations of the Securities Commission remain solely housed in the Securities Industry Act 2011, so that only substantive provisions affecting regulatory or supervisory activities of the Commission in relation to investment funds have been amended. The bill seeks to improve the governance structure of the Securities Commission by decreasing the maximum number of members that comprise the Commission and limiting the ex officio members of the Commission to the Executive Director of the Commission. Further, the Commission's role in the appointment of the Executive Director is enhanced, requiring that the Minister's appointment take account of and be on the basis of recommendations of the Commission. This change is consistent with IOSCO's international standards that requires the Commission to operate independent of governmental intervention. And you'll see that theme, Mr. Speaker, pop up in a lot of the regulations that are coming forward, where international standard is moved that these institutions must not only be independent, but be perceived to be independent so that they can fulfill their mandate without political interference. The bill clarifies that the Securities Commission's authority to access information includes the ability to access various kinds of information required to comply with its status as an A1 signatory to IOSCO's Enhanced Multilateral Memorandum of Understanding on the Exchange of Information, or as it is called, the Enhanced MMOU for short. The information clarified as accessible includes the audit information as well as internet and telephone subscriber logs and records. These provisions were essential to ensure that there was clear and express authority for the Commission to access these types of information upon which the Commission's signatory status to the Enhanced MMOU depends. I would like, Mr. Speaker, to take this opportunity to advise that the Commission is one of only 7 jurisdictions in the world to have been approved as an A1 signatory to the Enhanced MMOU based on IOSCO's most current reporting on their website. And this is alongside with several North American securities regulators and the securities regulators for Hong Kong and Singapore. This is a noteworthy achievement for our Securities Commission. And I do want to congratulate the Executive Director and her team for having achieved this international standard that puts us in the company of the best securities regulators in the world. Run by Bahamians, absolutely. This initiative was expressly undertaken by the Commission with a view to altering the perception of this jurisdiction from being the last to the table to being that of being a compliant early adopter. and this is one of the initiatives that I always explain to our industry as I speak, that we must ensure that we are not just compliant, but that we are in the position where we are leading the developments in our industry. Because that is the only place where you have an opportunity to influence how the industry develops, how regulatory structures develop, and you're able to put in to impact the direction that you want it to go, and you can protect your own interests. The bill includes amendments that specifically empower the Commission to supervise the activities of its constituents with respect to compliance with the Financial Transactions Reporting Act. These amendments clarify that the authority of the Commission is not only administrative, but it is also regulatory and supervisory, thereby enabling the Commission flexibility in the application of its regulatory tools for breaches of the Financial Transaction Reporting Act. These amendments are therefore critical in the jurisdiction's compliance with the 40 principles of the Financial Action Task Force regarding anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. To address the deficiencies as outlined within the Ease of Doing Business report, the bill provides the Commission with the ability to apply to the court for an order to protect investors and creditors of a public issuer. That means a publicly traded company. Further, the bill includes a provision which now requires the chairman and chief executive officer of public issuers to be separate, as the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Survey endorses. So you cannot be the chairman and the CEO of a publicly traded company. These amendments are consistent with international best practices for corporate governance. Mr. Speaker, there exists under the current legislation a lack of certainty regarding processes applicable to an appeal against actions or decisions by the Securities Commission. The amendments address anomalies in the Securities Industry Act as to whether certain decisions of the Commission are final decisions. The amendment clearly distinguished between a decision of the Securities Commission when only judicial review would be available and a final decision of the Commission which would be appealable and under which the licensee would be able to have the issues of the case adjudicated by an appellant court. In essence, the standard now clearly establishes that disciplinary matters heard by the hearing panel of the Securities Commission are appealable decisions and are subject to the Supreme Court's, on the civil side, appeals process. And appeals from supervisory or regulatory decisions of the Commission are subject to judicial review processes only. The bill includes provisions that enhance and strengthen the regulatory position of the Commission by expressly empowering the Commission to access books and records and to request information required to assist the Securities Commission in regulatory functions, including relating to the licensee's compliance with the Securities Industry Act of 2011 and the Financial Transaction Reporting Act of 2018. Further provisions are included in the bill to address a gap in the current legislation by expressly providing the Commission with the authority to conduct investigations, hearings, and impose sanctions, specifically in relation to breaches of the Act. This piece of legislation seeks to rectify the deficiencies of the current legislation and modernize securities laws to comply with international standards relating to anti-money laundering and countering of the financing of terrorism, as well as to ensure that minority interests are adequately protected as espoused by the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business standards. Mr. Speaker, I now move on to the Companies Bill, which seeks similar advantages and to correct similar issues. This legislation seeks to amend the Companies Act, Chapter 308, as it relates to conflict of interest, related party transactions, and shareholder governance. The proposed amendments will support the growth of the equity capital markets by providing for the enhanced protection of minority investors. The proposed amendments further seek to update the Act to ensure its compliance in these respects with international standards and best practices. Mr. Speaker, companies under this legislation provide the legal structure to which many Bahamian businesses operate, and they are currently in excess of some 10,000 companies incorporated and operating under the current legislation. Since the first iteration or the modern company in the Companies Act 1987, later updated to the Companies Act 1992, which itself has been amended several times, companies have been the legal vehicle of choice to which persons operating their businesses in the Bahamas incorporate. A properly structured corporate regime is therefore critical to the economic development of this country. Despite the copious reviews and regular updates to the Companies Act 1992, there are certain deficiencies remaining in the legislation which directly affect our ease of doing business index ratings. One of the key updates is the inclusion of provisions that will ensure that beneficial ownership of companies is recorded, understood, and appropriately accessible. Now, do you remember, Mr. Speaker, that late last year we passed a beneficial ownership registry act, and this is in line with that act to make the laws applicable to international companies also applicable to Bahamian companies. These changes will exponentially improve the transparency of information relating to the ownership of companies incorporated under the Companies Act. The amendments will require that a person holding shares in a nominee capacity record in the company's memorandum and on the company's register the beneficiaries for whom those shares are held. The amendment further expressly requires that the disclosure reveals the natural person that ultimately, directly or indirectly, owns or controls a company.
Thank you very much.
So you can't hide behind some of these structures anymore.
No more bearer shares.
No more bearer shares, for sure. Or bearer shares in name.
Sorry.
The company, to be clear, we've outlawed bearer shares for a number of years. The company must maintain this information at its registered office, and this is important. It will not be available on the public registry. So this information is required to be held by the registered agent, not necessarily for public display, unless there is a legal request for that information. Failure by a nominee to disclose that he holds shares in a nominee capacity may render the nominee liable to a penalty of $20 per day until the disclosure is remedied. Moreover, the amendments expressly make the failure of a company to meet its obligation to identify and verify its beneficial owners under Section 8 of the Beneficial Ownership Act 2018, a basis upon which the registrar may remove a company from the register of companies. These amendments first make it unlawful to operate a company incorporated as a Bahamian company without there being a record of the beneficial owners of that company, and secondly, provide appropriate responses for failure to comply. This information, however, is not public, and thus the privacy of the owner is protected. And that's important, Mr. Speaker, because I know that there is some concern about this from the wider public. The information on the beneficial owner is not a public document unless, of course, as I said, for some regulatory or legal purpose, it is required to be disclosed. And so the privacy of the owner will continue to be protected. But there must be, the declaration must be available. Because the information is maintained with the registered office of the company, access to information is therefore managed and controlled by the company and may be only accessed for legitimate purposes. Mr. Speaker, you will be aware that there has been a plethora of legislative initiatives undertaken in the past few months to address the jurisdiction's maintenance of beneficial ownership information. You will also be aware that these initiatives arose mainly in response to both the European Union's BEPS initiative and findings in the Mutual Evaluation Report of the Bahamas conducted by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Mr. Speaker, these particular amendments round out the legislative updates required to ensure that the jurisdiction's regime for the maintenance, availability, and accessibility to beneficial ownership information is robust and comprehensive. These amendments put the jurisdiction in a position of meeting the international standards and best practices for the maintenance and accessibility of beneficial ownership information for domestic companies, as provisions already exist for the maintenance and accessibility to beneficial ownership information of international business communities. And so again, Mr. Speaker, this is to eliminate preferences, which is one of the, again, the requirements of our commitments of our international partnerships, and again strengthens the overall regulatory oversight regime in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, the remainder of the amendments in this bill speak to the issues related to World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index and are critical to improving the ranking of the Bahamas in this international assessment. The amendments that I will summarize modernize and update the current company's legislation with the primary objective of meeting international standards and best practices relating to the protection of minority shareholder interests while taking account of the nuances of our industry. The amendments change the current standards applicable to the issuance of shares by companies' directors. The Companies Act currently gives directors unfettered discretion to issue company shares at such times and to such persons and for such considerations as the directors may determine. This authority is subject only to provisions in the company's articles relating to the issuance of shares. Mr. Speaker, these amendments update the current provisions, first to specify the kinds of actions that the directors can take in relation to share structures of the company, and secondly, to require that directors are authorized either by resolution of the company or in the articles of the company to take the actions specified in the bill. Actions in the bill include the allotment of shares, the grant of rights to subscribe for shares, and the issuance of instruments that may be convertible to shares. Moreover, the amendment requires that the authorization given to directors must specify the maximum amount of shares that may be allotted under the authorization, and the expiry date of the authorization must be specified. These amendments create a framework for the restructuring and reorganization of the share capital of a company, thereby reducing the opportunity for directors and majority shareholders to take actions that could dilute or affect the value of shares held by minority interest shareholders. The amendment provides that a subsidiary cannot hold shares in its parent. This is the international standard in company structuring and will protect companies from undue entrenchment and control of directors. The prohibition will not affect subsidiaries that currently own shares in its parent. So there's a saving clause. Moreover, the prohibition does not apply where the subsidiary holds shares as a personal representative or as a trustee, unless the parent company has a beneficial interest under the trust. This exception enables the continuation of the use of parent-subsidiary structures in estate planning and wealth management, where there is unlikely to be concern over potential influence of directors in these structures, because they are passive holding companies or structures and not operating entities. Mr. Speaker, the amendments summarized above speak directly to the issues relating to company structuring. The remaining amendments are multifaceted as they speak to both governance as well as disclosure standards. The provision of the current legislation provides that the authority for a company to issue dividends and establish standards for the calculation and determination of such dividends. The Companies Act, however, does not establish an obligation for the disclosure or notification of the issuance of a dividend, nor does it set parameters for the payment of such a dividend. These amendments require that the resolution declaring a dividend is sent to all shareholders of the company entitled to such dividends, and in the case of a public company, the issuance of a dividend is to be published in a local newspaper within 21 days of the issuance of the passing of the resolution. Additionally, the amendment requires that the dividend be paid within 120 days of the passing of the resolution to issue dividends. These provisions clearly set standards that will protect shareholders' interest in the profit of the company in which they have invested. These provisions ensure that minority and majority shareholders are aware of the entitlements to dividends and that the disbursements thereof is timely, protections that are currently lacking. Mr. Speaker, as in the case of the issuance of dividends, the current legislation includes a substantive requirement for companies to hold annual general meetings. What is lacking in the existing legislation, however, are key standards relating to the organization of an AGM. These amendments establish these basic standards by providing notice requirements. Specifically, the amendments require appropriate notice of an AGM be provided to all members and directors. The required notice period is prescribed at 21 days, and the bill, through the operation of law, amends all existing company documents that provide for a period of notice less than 21 days. I think the standard now is 14 days. So it now will be 21 days, and it applies to all existing companies by operation of law. In this regard, the amendment expressly changes any existing notice period provided in company documents that is less than 21 days to the required 21-day period stipulated in this amendment. Mr. Speaker, members are, however, able to waive their right to notice where voting shares in certain circumstances constitute a 90% majority or a lesser majority is provided for in the company's constitutive documents or by unanimous shareholder agreement. Further, Mr. Speaker, members holding more than 5% of the voting shares of a company are entitled to require the directors of the company to add specified items to the agenda, provided that the company is notified no less than 7 days prior to the scheduled date of the meeting. Mr. Speaker, One of the major advancements or achievements of the amendment is establishing transparency standards for related party transactions. These provisions outline requirements for the immediate and periodic disclosure of related party transactions, as well as provide shareholders with the ability to review such transactions. The bill establishes an obligation for directors or officers of a company to disclose in writing to the company's board of directors the nature and extent of any interest he or she has in any material contract that the company has with a third party. This will include both monetary interest and any position held by the director or officer in the third party entity. Moreover, the disclosure is not required only on the existence of the interest, but requires that all material facts relating to his interest also be disclosed. The bill also prohibits a director from voting to approve a contract in which he or she has an interest. Failure to make the required disclosure can result in the contract being set aside and exposes the director or officer to personal liability for damages caused to the company if he acted negligently, fraudulently, or in bad faith. These provisions, Mr. Speaker, protect minority shareholders from unfair or prejudicial transactions. Finally, as regards governance and disclosure standards, the bill empowers shareholders with access to the books and records of the company in appropriate circumstances and for proper purposes. The benefits of this ability to minority shareholders are obvious and needs no explanation. Taken together, the changes in governance and disclosure standards accomplished in this bill brings the jurisdiction's protection of minority shareholder interests in line with international standards and the best practices. Mr. Speaker, I wish also to note that these changes do not only benefit the Bahamas from the perspective of meeting international standards, but these are immeasurable benefits to be gained by the jurisdiction by implementing standards that ensure the appropriate governance standards and fair and equitable treatment of all shareholders. Conducting business in the Bahamas is eased and becomes more attractive, thereby encouraging entrepreneurship and economic development. Mr. Speaker, historically the role of the Registrar of Companies was limited to that of record keeper. Powers provided to the registrar were limited and had no regulatory element. In this global world, the potential for abuse of corporate structures requires heightened reporting on the part of the company and increased monitoring and oversight by the jurisdiction in which the company is incorporated. This has necessarily meant the expansion of powers of the registrar. The bill therefore empowers the registrar to remove companies that refuse or fail to maintain appropriate records and information with the registrar. This expands the current authority of the registrar, which is limited to striking off companies for failure to pay fees only at the moment. Moreover, the bill provides that companies that have been delinquent in their filings for more than 20 years and fail to update their information within 90 days of the act coming into force shall be removed from the Registrar of Companies. This, Mr. Speaker, will mean that for the first time in decades, the Registrar of Companies will actually reflect the status of corporations operating under the company's legislation. So after this act comes in, or this amendment comes into force, massive housekeeping will happen and the register of companies will reflect a clean registry of active companies. Wow. And that's important, Mr. Speaker, in a global context, because as you know, we are consistently scrutinized for for companies that are on our registry that we do not know the full extent of their activity. And some of these companies are, in fact, delinquent, but they're involved in transactions internationally of which we are not aware. And so the idea here is to get a clean registry that we will have full information on, including beneficial information, that we can stand before God and country and tell the world that we know the companies that are registered in our jurisdiction, we know what they do, we know who they are, and we are monitoring our list. So this is very important, and again, legislation or regulatory capability that is important to not only our domestic requirements, but also our international commitments. There are, of course, provisions that will also enable a company that has been removed to be restored once they have met the requisite conditions. Mr. Speaker, this bill also establishes clear and precise processes for the treatment of property owned by a company that is removed from the register. The process vests all property in the treasurer for a period of 20 years, after which the property is deemed bona vacantia. Vacantia. Meaning fully vacated.
Now you got recent attention.
I got you.
Personal knowledge.
And shall belong to the treasurer for the benefit of the Bahamas. So, on the striking of a company from the company's registry for failing to meet the obligations, the property, and that includes money, property, chattels, whatever, is transferred to the treasurer. The treasurer has to hold those assets for 20 years, after which they can be disposed of, if he knows about it. In the intervening period, the company can apply to be reinstated on the register and those assets revested. So I don't want to hear from the pundits out there, like they did with the dormant accounts, that the government trying to steal somebody's money. That is not the case.
5 years is a long time.
The fellas would say that on here.
5 years.
No, they aren't. You're right. But I say that for the mischief makers, because this came up in the dormant accounts debate. This came up in the dormant accounts debate. So I just want to make it clear: the state has no interest in confiscating anybody's asset. That is not what the state does. But we do have an obligation to ensure that we have a clean register. The provision of processes for the treatment of property relating to companies removed from the register enables the registrar to move with dispatch in exercising power to remove companies from the register. It also serves to protect the assets of the companies that are later restored to the register and limits the potential for misconduct by non-compliant members and operators. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, a robust, comprehensive, and agile corporate regime is essential to the development of corporate Bahamas. Companies provide business opportunities for entrepreneurs and big business alike. It provides a clear regime for corporate structures and conduct in the Bahamas, as well as for operating internationally. It further provides key mechanisms by which the jurisdiction is able to monitor, supervise, and address issues that potentially affect the reputation and standing of the country in international assessments. A copious corporate regime is critical to meeting international standards and best practices established in the second pillar of the country's economy, the financial services industry. As you're aware, Mr. Speaker, international standards have shifted and continue to shift in this industry. The Bahamas has to date defied its naysayers and has met the various challenges presented in maintaining its position as a key player in international finance. This is just one further step to ensure the maintenance of that standing. These bills before us for debate, Mr. Speaker, contribute to the Bahamas being brought into compliance with key international standards and best practices. In the case of amendments to the Companies Act, provisions relating to beneficial ownership transparency, governance, and disclosure standards for local companies, and a framework for the updating and maintenance of a register of companies are included in the bill. These changes are not only critical to meet international requirements, but also improve conditions for business operators under the Act locally. In the case of the Securities Industry Act amendment, provisions relating to governance structures of the Securities Commission, ease of doing business standards, and anti-money laundering principles improve international standards compliance. In both cases, there are also provisions which generally enhance the frameworks within which legislation each operates and modernize the Bahamas' infrastructure to ensure that we remain relevant as an international financial center. And finally, Mr. Speaker, as I close, I just want to get it. No, if I was going to be a preacher, I would go 3 times. I'm only going to go twice. I'm only going to go twice. In closing, yesterday there were some comments with respect to the ease of doing business in the Bahamas and the empowerment of Bahamian entrepreneurship and providing opportunities for Bahamian ownership. And I just want to state for the record, Mr. Speaker, that the business license process for Bahamians has been reduced from an average 2 to 3 weeks when we came into office in 2017 to as little as 48 hours today. And Mr. Speaker, that is not anecdotal comment. That is fact. There are a very few exceptions where there is a requirement because of food handling or some other police required vetting where it may take a day or 2 more. But in the main, even with those within 7 days, people are able to get their license. But in most cases, they can get their license within 48 hours. And there is provision now for a provisional license, which means that you can get your license in as little as 24 hours. So we're making substantial improvements in the ease of doing business in that regard, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to thank all of the agencies of government who have agreed to participate in this improvement exercise and are cooperating with the Department of Inland Revenue, ensuring that we meet our commitment to the Bahamian people to make this process of getting into business as easy and as stress-free as possible. There was a comment about the small entrepreneurs not having access to the same benefits as international investors. And Mr. Speaker, again, this is important for the Bahamian public to know, because the government has made a deliberate effort to ensure that we empower local, native Bahamian entrepreneurs and those who have a creative or innovative idea that they wish to bring forward, both with respect to help in building out their business case, but also in finding capital to support that idea. And I keep saying to would-be entrepreneurs as we do these town hall meetings that no idea is too far left field that it cannot be considered. Of course, the whole objective of the Small Business Development Center is to vet these ideas to make sure that they are commercially viable. Because there's no point in bringing something to the table that you neither have the ability to bring forward or it's just not going to be sustainable. Because again, we're not in the business of giving away money. This is the Bahamian taxpayers' money. And so I'm going to address the money on the ground thing. We're not in the business of giving away money. This is the Bahamian taxpayers' money. And we have no time and we have no money to give away. But we are in the business of investing in Bahamian. And so we are vetting the ideas to ensure that these Bahamians who come forward will have the best chance of being successful. And yes, they have access to capital through a number of initiatives, whether it's private investment, whether it is bank financing, whether it is grant funding, or whether it is through joint venture partnership. We are making those available. And I encourage people to go onto the Small Business Development website, sbdcbahamas.com, and learn about what is available there. So we can try to put this thing to rest, and we can empower those Bahamians who desire to get into business. Everybody knows that the member for Kalani has a particular affinity for over-the-hill areas, and they are targeted especially for increased and intense attention and benefit with respect to the initiatives through the Small Business Development Center, meaning that it is easier for them, even easier than other Bahamians, to access this Small Business Development Center and what is available through that agency. All you have to do is have an idea and come forward, present your idea, and be prepared to be committed, to be prepared to do the work, both the work before your idea is funded and after. Be committed. The thing about throwing money on the ground, and I know time is running out, so I'm going to be quick, hopefully. But I think it's important to get this thing straight. Because I've heard it several times, the chairman for the opposition is in Grand Bahama every weekend. I don't know why he's there every weekend, but he's there every weekend. And he makes these statements, throw money on the ground. The government needs to throw money on the ground. Well, I wonder, how much money does he have that he can throw money on the ground? I know the government of the Bahamas doesn't have that much money that he can the people's money that he can throw on the ground. That is what has gotten us into the financial problems that we have today. Throwing money on the ground with no purpose, with no intention.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, the member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andrews.
I would not allow the member for, in deference to him in his presentation, I would not allow him to misconstrue what I would have said and to trivialize the point that I would have made yesterday. I didn't mean literally throw no money on the ground. He knows better. The fact of the matter, I listened to his comments about his commentary about the ease of doing business and the Small Business Development Center. The reality is, lots of Bahamians over the years have been committed to keeping their business operational and also wanted to expand and also improve their business, but they cannot access capital. And that's the reality. And I said to him, I said in no small way, in our society where there's much, and we talk about the foreign reserves and what's happening with level of liquidity in our society, Bahamian people are not feeling it. And all I'm simply saying, in the everyday vernacular, people are saying we got to put something on the ground. They call it trickle-down economics. I'm saying in my kind of way, I'm saying put money on the ground. Let people feel the money that is in our society. That's what I'm saying. He can't change that. He cannot speak for me as a member for East Grand Bahama and as Minister of Finance. That's his portfolio. But the way what I said, I wouldn't change it. I'm saying give the people in the everyday and the wide expanse of the human society. Put something in their pocket. Let them feel what's happening in our society. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm talking about. And don't try to take what I say out of context. I didn't say nothing but throwing them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I think the member clearly further illuminated the point that I'm trying to make. And that is that the government of the Bahamas is the guardian and custodian of the Bahamian people's money. We have no right to put money in people's pockets. We have no right. It is irresponsible. Now, what we do have an obligation to, and his wider point, and I take his wider point, because I'm sure this is what he meant, right? Which is to develop policies, develop programs that empowers Bahamians through the access to capital, through the access to programs that will benefit them socially and economically. That is a relevant point. And I don't have an argument or difficulty with that, because, again, as I indicated, the government has put in place a program to do exactly that, to empower Bahamians, not to give them free money. Because the truth of the matter is, as Jesus says, the poor will always be with you. You can't fill that. But you can empower people. Give them the line and the hook to go catch a couple of wilks and fish for themselves. There is good point. There are training programs, not only with the Small Business Development Center, but also with UB, free tuition next year. This year, something that the Prime Minister is very, very adamant about. Plus 500 to support those, including yours, the Southern Central Landers. Your residents, your constituents are now able to come to Nassau and go to UB, get a degree, and be supported during that process. $500 a month.
That's putting money in the pocket.
That's putting money in the pocket. That's putting money in the pocket. They ain't throwing it on the ground. Right? There is free training at BTDI to ensure that people get technical skills. That's money in the bank. Right? So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to. I understand fully, Mr. Speaker, when they say money on the ground, what they mean. I think I understand anyway. But I think that they ought to make that clear to the Bahamian people and to all those who are interested in listening. That this is not about free money, because there's no such thing. We have no free money to give. But this is about investing in the lives of Bahamians to help them to be able to lift themselves up and providing the structure and the support while they engage in uplifting themselves. That's important, and that is a valid point, Mr. Speaker. I think, Mr. Speaker, I think that's about all I really want to say about that. Just to say that, you know, I don't want Bahamians to believe that this government is ignoring the plight of those who are disadvantaged, who have been historically disadvantaged. Whether in heritage communities, as I call them, or foundation communities, or whether from the family islands that have not been, had access to the kind of exposure and funding and support that other communities may have had. This is a holistic government. We are looking at the Bahamas as a whole. The Prime Minister has demonstrated tangibly his commitment to the entirety of the Bahamas. And we are fulfilling and following through in a tangible way. In a tangible way, that commitment, so that every Bahamian, including Ragged Island, will feel their government, and that their government is working for them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Is there a seconder? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as always, I rise on behalf of the good people of the great constituency of St. Anne's on my, as Papa used to say, on my third non-consecutive term in this place, with 2 other terms consecutive in the other place. Mr. Speaker, the member for Grand Bahama, East Grand Bahama, has done an excellent job in laying out the 2 bills, so I won't go through them in the detail that he did, but I just want to add my couple of comments to it. As we go back and look at the 2 years that we've been in government, we got, in the very first part of May of 2017, we were faced with this whole issue of whether or not to go by bilateral agreements or by multilateral agreements, which is the beginning of the CRS, BEPS, Common Reporting Standard, Base Erosion, Profit Shifting standards, and the former administration was doing a bilateral approach, and we took we decided to take a multilateral approach, and therefore the member for East Grand Bahama, myself, and the AG were both in Europe on several trips, and I noticed the honourable member for Angleston said we should cancel a couple of trips. That was a case where we went to Geneva, we went to San Marino, and we were able to talk to the EU, OECD. We then flew to Paris and came back with the multilateral convention signed and confirmed, which began this recent round of the whole question of BEPS, CRS, beneficial ownership, and we've all seen in the press the various aspects of that whole running on. So here we are today at some of the tail end of the legislation to bring in the whole shifting of those goalposts with the OECD, EU, and we're successfully doing it, and we'll do it before the end of April. It'll be gazetted and brought into effect. That whole issue required a lot of work to be done. So for instance, with CRS, Common Report, we rolled that out. Companies have complied with and been able to do their common reporting standards, and new companies will come on, new jurisdictions will come online very shortly. With regard to BEPS, we rolled that out, and it's been very successful. I think everyone in the financial services industry will agree that that was rolled out without very few glitches, and came on to effect, which kept us in compliance with the international reporting requirements. We also, in the process, we've signed an agreement to create the beneficial ownership register, which is being worked on now, I think, between finance and the AG's office, so that we can comply with the whole question of the beneficial ownership legislation that we brought here. And you heard the member for East Grand Bahama talk about how now the companies register. So any of you that practice, I don't practice anymore, obviously, because I'm in government, would go down to the companies register, and in my case, you would see Secretary 1, Secretary 2, Secretary 3, Secretary 4, and Secretary 5. And they were the shareholders of the company on the annual. And then you'd see Brent Simonet and Craig Simonet as the directors. Well, you obviously knew what was happening there, you know. So you might have a case where someone's being cute, and they're saying, well, John and Harry are the shareholders, when really we know that it's Edward and John. Well, Edward and John. I use Edward for a reason. You know, and it might be, so now what's happening under these amendments is, in compliance with the beneficial ownership, is that you can't then have, let's say Graham Thompson has a series of, most law firms have GTC corporate services provider, or Davis & Co. service provider, or whatever it is, and they're the names that appear as a secretary on. So we've all been through this routine, and so this is a way that it doesn't have to become public, but in keeping with the beneficial ownership, we will now be able to tell that Brent Simonet is the owner of the company that has Secretary 1, Secretary 2, Secretary 3, Secretary 4, Secretary 5. And that's a massive step forward in keeping with the OECD and EU requirements. East Grand Bahama talked about financial action, transaction reporting, Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, Financial Action Task Force, and all of these are coming together in this whole legislation to provide the final icing on the cake of what we've been trying to do in the last couple of years. There is still some work to be done with regard to Financial Intelligence Unit and some of the other, on the policies and the practices on the ground. That is being worked on a daily basis, because there are deadlines. Come July, and that we've complied with, certainly with regard to CFADF, CRS. We've obliged ourselves to deadlines throughout the rest of this year, which we are continuing to meet. And on the whole, the financial services industry, when I was last in Switzerland, are very compliant, understanding, because they have to do it in their own jurisdictions. So we're moving along in a great speed there. East Grand Bahama mentioned IOSCA. Please do not take that lightly. What the Securities Commission have been able to do by signing on at that grade of IOSCA is very, very important. We are a leading destination. I would like to thank, I personally like to thank Christina Roll and her team at the Securities Commission. They continue to do a fantastic job in regulating the industry, making sure we're compliant, our members are compliant. Her team did the investment funds bill. It was a modernization of the investment funds bill. I was with her in the UK, where she did a presentation. I've been with her in a number of countries. She and her team do a fantastic job being out there promoting the Bahamas with the investment funds bill, and they all need to be congratulated. Sometimes people will be sort of sitting there saying, well, what has striking off of a company got to do with the OECD and financial report and everything else? One of the issues we got hit with, the member for East Grand Bahama, the Attorney General, myself, when we were over there, is a number of these international organizations know how many companies we have. We have thousands of companies, I think it's 22,000, I can't remember the exact number, on the register. And not all of them are active. It's like the dormant accounts. You know, you have a number of accounts out there. So for instance, a law firm might have 30 companies where the client hasn't sent them the $350 and it doesn't get paid to the Treasury, but that company still hangs out there. And it's important for the, and as a member for East Grand Bahama said, at the moment the Registrar General is just a, I don't want this is not belittling, but is a record keeping. In other words, you send in the check, they put it on the file, they give you a letter of good standing, and you move on. But those companies that aren't out there, and they need to be struck off because people are looking at us saying, what do you have 20,000 odd companies and you only have 4,000, I think was the exact number, paying business license. And East Grand Bahama and myself had to explain to them, like for instance, in my case, the house I live in is owned by a company, so it doesn't pay business license. And a lot of times they don't understand our common law jurisdiction as opposed to other law jurisdictions. So, you know, we have a number of companies. Yes, respect to statistics, yeah. So why are there 4,000 paying real business license and 22,000 out there just holding company? Some of them are dormant, some of them are active. But this is now putting on the client, our clients, the obligation to make sure we send our fees in and the annual return gets sent in, the company is current. Otherwise, those companies are struck off the register, while still protecting the assets. Now, this is nothing new because the company law still provides for when you strike off a company, you can apply to have it put back on. It's an onerous process. So I think this process under the new Companies Act, or the Amendment to the Companies Act, actually solidifies that issue and puts it in the Treasury for 20 years and puts a structure that is there. There are a number of companies, for instance, they don't want to go to their lawyer and tell the lawyer to go and cease to do business or no longer doesn't have any assets in line, because the lawyer will charge them, what, $700,000, something like that, to strike the company off. So they just walk away from it. Don't send the lawyers any money. So there's a lot of defunct companies that are out there for that reason. The fellow's finished, doesn't need the company anymore, so he doesn't send his lawyer this $350 plus whatever the fees are to strike it off, and he just walks away from it. So there's a number of reasons why all of this has to happen. We'll strike them off and clean that issue up. The one that I really want to focus for a few minutes on is the importance of this minority shareholding in the Companies Act. Many of us, me included, have been in situations where the majority shareholder tells you go and play in the traffic, or whatever words they use. Go fly a kite. We've all been in. So when, you know, we do these public share offerings, they come in. I remember a friend of mine tried to stand up at an AGM, and they said, boy, sit down. We got 90% of the shares right here in our proxies. What do you want? Sit down. I wasn't going to use one by name, but you could use that.
We don't do that.
Which, you know what? In my opinion, I think what it does is it restricts people or prohibits people or puts people off, whichever word you want to use, in investing in some of these opportunities because they don't feel they have security for the couple of little dollars they put in an organization. So I think these amendments really do that. I mean, you could have a publicly traded company say, and it has happened, the proxies got lost in the mail or didn't get delivered. They hold an AGM, they do a couple little stuff, five big shareholders come along and say, you go fly a kite, end of subject. So I think, if nothing else, it strengthens the minority interest, which I think is important. That has to be done. I think it also gives us more confidence that if we want to invest in firms, that there'll be a protection for the minority shareholder. And hopefully, over time, that'll cause a number of persons to create new businesses and go into new ventures where they do joint ventures. Because a number of Bahamians don't like joint ventures because they feel they're not, you know, they're not getting coverage. I mean, there are ways if four fellows get together to have classes in your shareholding so each one is protected. So I think this hopefully will cause persons to want to go out and invest with their friends, their colleagues, invest in a number of the public share offerings that are going to be coming out in the government portfolio in very short order so that they can feel that there is some protection. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to add those few comments in seconding these two bills because I think the member for East Grand Bahama did an excellent job, so there's no need to repeat the obvious. I just would like to put, DPM was member for Grand Bahama was on his feet speaking, so we didn't disturb him. There will be there will be an amendment in committal stage to the Companies Act in the long title, so that I'm just foreshadowing it now. So at the moment it reads, a bill for an act to provide for the enhanced protection of minority investors. We want to move an amendment to read, a bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for. So it's just to add the words, but we'll do the formal moving of it to tidy up the definition. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I move the second reading, I'll second the two bills that are before us today.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following compendium of bills be read a second time. Yeah. Okay. It has been moved and seconded that the following bills be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for enhanced protection of minority investors, shareholders, governance, and for matters connected thereto. As many as are in favor will remain seated. As many.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate your haste today. I am indeed honored, Mr. Speaker, to speak again on behalf of the great people of Exuma and the long-suffering people of Ragged Island who await their green city, the soon-to-be green city of Ragged Island. I am pleased to represent them, Mr. Speaker. I find this a rare occasion, Mr. Speaker, when we can meet 2 days in a row to actually discuss the people's business. I've often lamented, Mr. Speaker, the lack of agenda of this administration, Mr. Speaker. So it's good to be at work again. Good to be at work again and speak on behalf of the people of Exuma. Here we are today debating two pieces of legislation, one that in my mind does not require full debate.
Honourable member, the member for Yamacraw, are you on a point of order? Yes.
Over and over again, Mr. Speaker, Exuma has lamented for the erroneous position that the government does not have, or that there is a lack of a legislative agenda. I remember when we first started, he spoke about us not appearing after his leader accompanied my leader after the hurricane, that awesome hurricane experience. When we removed persons from the island, repatriated them, and then we went on a vigorous legislative agenda. I want to reinsure the good member that this government has has a legislative agenda based on the speech from the throne, instructions from ministers that are being outlined. I can give them a copy. I've already said in this place that at any given time, we have almost at least 6 weeks of legislation that is laid before this House. Once it's laid, you're to be ready. On many occasions, they come here and they ask for time. Now, I'm happy that, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that he's here today and they have not walked out of the House. But if they're here on occasions, we can have a discussion on the legislation. But to say that we do not have a legislative agenda, or that there's a lack of a legislative agenda, is totally erroneous. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure the member for Yamakro is going in discussing travel of the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, you know. I'm not sure what that was about, so it didn't really resonate or address any point I believe he was trying to make, so I'm going to ignore that point, Mr. Speaker. But I believe we see that this government live in a different world from the regular people on the ground. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, one member was speaking of how wonderful the economy is doing, how magnificent and how happy the people are. And the member from South Andros, rightly pointed out that the reality that this government lives in is incredibly different from the reality on the ground. So when people observe that it's difficult to make ends meet, that's one reality. When you observe this booming, vibrant economy, that's another reality. When this administration observes that they have an efficient legislative agenda where they're rolling out legislation that pleases the people of the Bahamas, that's one reality. But when the people on the ground see, that week after week we come in and we do communication by members and then we go home, or we pass legislation that doesn't fix or heal the issues and the hurt of the Bahamian people, that's another reality. So I'm speaking on behalf of the people of Exuma and Ragged Island. I'm speaking to their reality. I'm speaking to their observations. And therefore, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable members, the members on the team.
If he stands, Mr. Speaker, I'll address that too, Mr. Speaker. But the great people of Exuma await me, Mr. Speaker. Because we're having a wonderful event this week, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate his efforts to keep me in this reality. But the people on the ground in Exuma appreciates my presence. Mr. Speaker, I often lament the lack of an agenda, but I'm happy to be here today for the second day in a row to speak to what are important pieces of legislation. The member for Yamakro allowed me to complete my thoughts. He would find that today is not overwhelmingly contentious issues, and I don't intend to be very long. The dilemma, Mr. Speaker, I suppose, is whether you support a bill that has protections for some, but could pose some hardship to small business. I lamented yesterday the need for more progressive legislation that will increase the ease of doing business. So as far as that's concerned, we're on the same page. These amendments are important, no question, but I don't want this administration to get completely carried away that they do a great deal for the average Bahamian or the average domestic Bahamian business. So let's just examine what we have before us. On the one hand, we have the Securities Industry Amendment Bill 2019 that will introduce new terms and provide important clarifications with respect to the administrative structure and powers of the Securities Commission. This bill, according to the Securities Commission, which I understand was benchmarked by them, is legislation that will address the nature of the Commission's assistance to overseas authorities, the scope of investigations, and how appeals of Commission's decisions are to be administered. The bill will also clarify the activities of those engaged in the securities business, particularly as it relates to public entities. These amendments will also ensure the Commission's ability to enhance compliance of the industry with international standards on anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing, and securities laws in line with the Financial Transaction Reporting Act, which was not too long ago passed in this place. Mr. Speaker, we have no problem with this legislation, and we will support it. Sometimes it's best to allow the experts, as happened in this case, to assist in crafting legislation that makes sense for those who actually work in the industry. And then the legal technicians will ensure, as I presume was done in this case, that there's no harm to other industries or sectors. And looking at this, we generally have no issue, as it does bring the Commission merely in line with international best practice. And we know already that we are very well regulated International Financial Services Center. And therefore, I take pride and honor in congratulating the Securities Commission in their leadership and in their ongoing work in bolstering the financial services sector of the Bahamas. Consulting actual stakeholders is perhaps something this government can and should do even more of. Because, Mr. Speaker, what we've seen in some of the bills passed is a backtracking and a revision in very short periods of time. We see a complete backtrack on some of the legislation brought during the last budget debate, the gaming bills and the business license amendments, and the government had to walk back many of these pieces of legislation. And this is why when we talk about meaningful consultation, we want to ensure that the government is drawing on all of the expertise available to us in the Bahamas to ensure that we pass best quality, best-in-class legislation. And with that said, Mr. Speaker, it brings me to the Companies Amendment Bill 2019, where we do have some reservations. And this feels rushed to us, Mr. Speaker, and we don't think that there was meaningful consultation on the bill as to what the ramifications down the road might be. And it reminds us, Mr. Speaker, of the non-profit organization bill. And the side opposite told us that there was wide and broad consultation, and then we saw numerous non-profit organizations and churches rising and speaking out against the bill. So it's important, Mr. Speaker, that we not be all-knowing in this place. It's important, Yamakro, that this administration does not pretend to be all-knowing, but to always consult widely and broadly. And I do believe in this particular case, there could have been more such consultation. People need to generally understand what the impact will be on their businesses and their lives. This is how many people live, not as MPs or cabinet ministers or in appointed positions. We, in the real world, we make ends meet by driving business. This is how many of the people in that reality on the ground survive and they thrive. They work for years using their savings and using their life assets as collateral to build their businesses. And therefore, we'd like to think that they truly understand how to do it. They live it. Some of them barely survive, Mr. Speaker. And most of them, the last thing they look for would be more bureaucracy in how they go about doing business. So there has to be a balance struck, is the point that I am making, Mr. Speaker. And they look for government in this parliament to protect them. They look to us to create facilitating environments. They look to us to create opportunities for them so that they can thrive and they can grow and they can hire more people. That's what they look for us to do. And they hope the government does right by them. And they intend to follow the rules of law of our country. And they want the government not to burden them with unnecessary taxation and too many bureaucracies. The most arrogant thing a government can do is assume that it knows what's better for business than people who run their businesses. And I think, whilst, Mr. Speaker, there's definitely some good in some of these amendments, specifically in protection of minority shareholders, and the member for St. Anne's gave some good examples, we anticipate that there is some mischief that this government may find down the road in these amendments to the Companies Act. A long-standing, well-established piece of legislation, and we may find that amending it in a rush is no small undertaking, and no doubt as we move along, new issues will arise. Mr. Speaker, as a general concern, the bill seemed to paint with a broad brush all companies, except for a few references to public entities. And I want to go through and highlight a few brief general concerns. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, when we look at the definition of key employee, it seems very loose and should more accurately, in my view, refer to the senior command of the business. The definition refers to any employee who can cause harm if they leave. I would submit that in financial services businesses, for example, any employee with access to a client list and confidential information can cause harm. And we should therefore try to streamline this definition and be more specific. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, this bill also introduces something called the spousal equivalent. And I don't know how you feel about that, Mr. Speaker. I'm not quite sure what it means or whether there's some basis in law in some other piece of legislation. I wonder if anyone could point me to some definition in some other parallel piece of legislation. I wonder what the Christian Council would say about this, Mr. Speaker. So I invite, Mr. Speaker, the government side to look at some of these definitions and seek to clean them up, Mr. Speaker. And then it takes me to number 3, the definition of the substantial monetary contribution in the bill. It seems well-intentioned, but perhaps misguided, Mr. Speaker, as does the definition of substantial monetary contributor. The bill says this means an entity that provides a loan or other financing to a company in excess of 10% of its non-equity financing. I have to say this one poses an issue. In our country, Mr. Speaker, an entity providing funding by way of a loan can be a bank, insurance company, financial services company, and therefore it should not be a related party in an arm's length transaction. It cannot be conceivable that this is what was intended by this amendment, and I invite this administration to take another look and seek to clarify or sanitize these specific definitions, Mr. Speaker. Many investors would be interested in helping a company with potential without taking a stake in the company, Mr. Speaker. And many investors would do so in a very arm's length type of a way. So this might even extend beyond banks, insurance companies, and financial institutions, but I invite this administration to look at it more closely. Mr. Speaker, these amendments generally appear to impose new governance requirements that would possibly throw small and medium-sized businesses that don't have a very sophisticated governance structure in place into non-compliance almost immediately. And that's a problem that we must mitigate. However, as we stated, these amendments to the Companies Act are important in that they further protect minority shareholders and investors in businesses as it relates to conflict of interest, related party transactions, and shareholder governance. On the very face of it, the bill subscribes to international best practice on the issues of governance, disclosure, and transparency. And as you well know, Mr. Speaker, these are ideals that we support. So what's the verdict today? With the amendments to the Securities Industry Bill, this brings in the industry in line with best practice in the governance structure of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas. We recognize that the Securities Commission of the Bahamas is the competent authority on these matters and on these issues, and we are satisfied that they, unlike many other segments, they have been appropriately consulted on these issues. And the bill is relatively straightforward and does not warrant significant, lengthy debate, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, I confirm that we will vote in support of this bill. With the amendments to the Companies Act, Mr. Speaker, we will not unnecessarily withhold support, as we do not object generally to the general themes and principles of the bill, Mr. Speaker. We do note, though, that the amendments seem in large part rushed and in some cases will not lead in practical terms to ease of doing business. Our concern is that on day one, and even after the 90-day transition period, this bill will impose numerous onerous governance restrictions on small and medium-sized companies, pushing them into non-compliance and increasing their costs, generally, of compliance. So technically, yes, the legislation ticks the box of ease of doing business, and no doubt the World Bank surveyors will be pleased. And we generally want to overall improve our ease of doing business ranking in the Bahamas. And on that score, no doubt the business community will be pleased. But small businesses represent 70% or more of businesses in this country. And we must take care that provisions we pass make life easier in practical terms for them as well. We always caution the government, Mr. Speaker, on seeking to appease international agencies to the detriment of those who actually live and work in this country. And we urge this government again to recognize that there are, in fact, three realities. The reality of these international organizations, the reality of the cocoon that meets on Tuesdays, and the reality on the ground, Mr. Speaker. And we must acknowledge, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for South Beach on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, member for Exuma and the Ragged Island is a most honorable, of matchless distinction in the social stratosphere of this country. Undeserving of that stamp. Undeserving of that stamp.
Honorable member, let's just withdraw the word and use another one.
I withdraw the Tuesday cocoon, Mr. Speaker. But I invite this administration to recognize that there's a reality on the ground that's distinctly different from the reality that they might see, and the reality that they might experience. And I invite them to take my word for it, or suffer the consequences as we hope they do, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate, I would do it, Mr. Speaker.
Just on a housekeeping, the clock has been...
I see I have 30 minutes, Mr. Speaker.
Actually, you have a third of 30 minutes.
I'm wrapping up, Mr. Speaker. I'll be done in a minute. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've indicated, this bill ticks a box, and we want to ensure that we are facilitating business on the ground, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we trust that this bill assists in our international reputation. We trust that it assists in bolstering our reputation in the international community, and hopefully will attract more foreign direct investment in Bahamas. Although I will tell you, those large companies normally have shareholders agreements and contracts that protect themselves, and they usually need very little protecting. But I hope, Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of the people on the ground who I represent, that more opportunities come to our country, create more jobs and more opportunities for small and medium-sized business. I want to point out that the opposition saw this bill, Mr. Speaker, for the first time yesterday when it was laid. I want to point that out for the record, Yamatro. And I believe it's incumbent upon us as a parliament that we pass the best-in-class legislation. And if we are to do that, Mr. Speaker, there's probably a better way to do this. We do support the bill, but as usual reserve the right to propose amendments in the Senate, as I suspect we will do, as I suspect there will be new issues that arise. With that said, Mr. Speaker, I'm headed to Georgetown to the premier regatta in the country, Mr. Speaker. It's why we call it the National Family Island Regatta. I congratulate the Commodore of this regatta who has served for many, many years, Commodore Danny Strawn, and his hard-working National Family Island Regatta Committee on the 66th regatta. It's a huge undertaking, Mr. Speaker, and when we arrive, we see the things in place and everything seems jolly. But this committee has sleepless nights. They work very hard, and I want to offer my commendation and my thanks to them for the hard work that they've done in earning the distinction of not calling this the Georgetown Regatta or the Exuma Regatta, but in calling this the National Family Island Regatta. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the people of Exuma and Ragged Island, we thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, for the wrap-up. Mr. Speaker, I thought the member was going to say thank the government for its support of the National Family Island Regatta in Georgetown, Exuma.
Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
I do thank the several past ministers, Minister Wells, and indeed the member for Marco City, the current minister responsible for regatta, for supporting regattas across the Bahamas, really, but through many of the settlements in Exuma, Farmers Key and Black Point, Rollville, and many other communities, Mr. Speaker. This brings great economic benefit, and we are grateful for the subventions provided by the government, and also to my colleague and friend, the Minister of Tourism. We know that there are also some contributions by the Ministry of Tourism. So we are grateful, Mr. Speaker, and we trust that the Minister of Finance will keep the money flowing.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for East Grand Bahama.
I thank the member for Exuma and Ragged Island. You know, I wanted him to say that because I wanted him to admit that the Minister of Finance, a member for East Grand Bahama, is putting money on the ground. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the member for his comments, some of which are you know, need no explanation. You know, it's a viewpoint. One of the things that I think is very important that we make clear, and I say this always because you know, when you're in government, there are any number of interested stakeholders that hold a view, and they present their view. And if you don't follow their suggestion, then they will make the comment that you didn't consult, that you didn't fully consider what we had to say. But in the development of policy, there is any number of inputs to the decision making that sometimes and invariably there's going to be one group or the other that didn't get its way. And so that is not a lack of consultation. That is just the government receiving all inputs, and based upon those inputs as well as what it may know that it cannot or does not put forth in the public sphere, for whatever reason, it comes to a conclusion. And in respect to these bills, there was consultation. And on both bills, there was consultation. And so I just wanted to make that point because there's an inherent conflict between regulator and industry. And that is sometimes very difficult for us, a very difficult line for us to walk. Because what may be in the interest of the industry sometimes conflicts with global practice from a regulatory point of view. And certainly my colleague from Centerville will know, as auditors, we face this all the time because you are unpopular as a regulator. People don't like you because you're telling them what the rules are. And so balancing that is always a difficult exercise. But at the end of the day, you have to do what is best practice and which follows international standard. And that's what we try to do here. In respect to protecting investors, the member for Exuma mentioned that we ought to be mindful of how these rules affect the small investor, particularly the domestic investor or the small business person. This act not only expressly protects minority interests, though that being the small guy who may have a couple of shares in a company, but it also allows that same small mom and pop shop who has a brilliant idea but doesn't have the capital to expand to now go into the marketplace and seek investors to his business so that he can expand, and giving those investors the confidence that their money invested in these companies will be protected and that they will have their rights protected. And so giving them a bit more surety and confidence that they can invest with their brother and their investment will not be wasted or squandered. So by the very nature of this legislation, it promotes capital markets, it promotes the expansion and empowerment of Bahamians and protection of their investment. In respect to the comments in regard to related parties, where the member indicated that a bank, for instance, cannot be a vested party. Well, they are, by definition. And remember what we're talking about here now. We're talking about the relationship between a related party and the activities of the company. So by the very fact that I, as an investor, or I, as a bank, have an interest in the activities of this company, if that company now is forced or is somehow unduly influenced to enter into a contract with somebody or an entity that I have an interest in, that ought to be disclosed, even if it is a bank. So for the sake of argument, one of my colleagues here may have an interest in a bank. I ain't calling no names. May. But they may also have business interest in a real estate company.
It's like the fun.
I am a business person who solicits money, loan, from that bank. It cannot be right now for the bank to say, I put money to support your business, you must now rent from me in this other business that I have. So that is the context in which the bill speaks about related parties and financiers. Right? It is not, if it's a condition of the loan, that's a different thing. But even then, even if it is a condition, no, but even if it is a condition of the loan, what the law is saying, what this amendment is saying, is that it must be disclosed. It doesn't say necessarily it's prohibited, but what it's saying is it must be disclosed to the shareholders. It must be disclosed to all shareholders, right? So that's all that is trying to say. It's not saying that because you are a loan lender or an investor or a financier, that you somehow must disclose your, or not disclose your interest, but you have some influence. It just means that you must disclose. So that's all that is. And there was a couple of other definitions that the member spoke about. I just want to make it clear that they are all in the context of the requirement to disclose your interest in the activities of this entity. So again, I think that's pretty much the point that I wanted to make. I think otherwise than that, we are all pretty much in agreement. This is a business permit? What's that? There's a question about what is the spousal equivalent. You know, in the Bahamian context, that can mean a lot of things. And I think I would prefer to leave that to the lawyers to define. But again, at the end of the day, it speaks about significant influence, the ability to exert significant influence in a transaction. So however you define that, and I leave that again for the lawyers to figure out. But again, this is a rational approach to this exercise and to this activity. I do commend it to the House for passage. Thank you very much.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for the enhanced protection of minority investors, shareholders' governance, and for matters connected thereto. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to provide for enhanced protection of minority investors, shareholders' governance, and for matters connected thereto.
For the second reading and committal of bills.
Mr. Speaker, there are no...
The security.
Oh, the security.
Stand up and do it.
Mr. Speaker, I do move that the Securities Industries Amendment Bill 2019 be read a second time.
Second. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Securities Industry Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to amend the Securities Industry Act.
For the second reading and committal of bills.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further second readings, but I pause for a minute to give my colleagues an opportunity to get in to the chamber. I do now move, Mr. Speaker, that the House resolves itself into a committee of the whole House with the Deputy Speaker in the chair.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House now dissolve itself into a committee of the whole House with the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the Committee of the whole House in the chair. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House with the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the Committee of the whole House in the chair.
Committee of the Whole. Chair recognizes the member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do move that the long title of a bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act to make provisions for the H-1B work visa and the H-4S permit to provide for work visa exemptions and for connected matters thereto.
Being moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The long title of the bill is agreed.
Mr. Chair, I move that the short title and commencement be agreed.
Second, Mr. Chair. It's been moved and seconded that the short title and the commencement of the bill be agreed. As many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The short title and commencement of the bill is agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I move that clauses 2 through 5 be agreed.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that clause 2 through 5 of the bill be agreed. As many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 2 through 5 of the bill is agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the schedule be agreed.
It's been moved and seconded that the schedule of the bill be agreed. As many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The schedule of the bill is agreed.
I do now move, Mr. Chair, that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The bill is agreed in its entirety.
Mr. Chairman, I do now move for the long title to be agreed for a bill for an act to provide for the enhanced protection of minority investors, shareholder governance, and for matters connected thereto.
Being moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. Many members in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The long title the chair recognizes the member for Sunan.
Mr. Chairman, as I foreshadowed in my contribution to the Companies Act, I want to move that in the long title, immediately after the words "a bill for an act," insert the words "to amend the Companies Act," so that the long title will read, "A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for enhanced protection of mine," and so on and so forth. It's just to insert the words, "A bill to amend the Companies Act."
Second. It's been moved and seconded that the long title.
Which one side of it?
Been moved that the long title of the bill be amended as read. Any in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The long title of the bill is agreed as amended. Sign that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do now move that the short title and commencement be agreed.
Second. Being moved and seconded that the short title and the commencement of the bill be agreed. Many members in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The short title and commencement of the bill is agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I move that clauses 2 through 18 be agreed.
Second. Being moved and seconded that clause 2 through 18 of the bill be agreed. Many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 2 through 18 of the bill is agreed.
I do now move, Mr. Chair, that the bill be agreed in its entirety.
Being moved and seconded that the bill be agreed in its entirety. Many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The bill is agreed in its entirety.
Mr. Chairman, I do now move for the agreement on the long title for a bill for an act to amend the Securities Industry Act.
Second. Being moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. Many members in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The long title of the bill is agreed.
I do now move, Mr. Chair, that the short title be agreed.
Second. Being moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. Many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The short title of the bill is agreed.
I move, Mr. Chairman, that clauses 2 through 31 be agreed.
Second. Being moved and seconded that clause 2 through 31, the bill be agreed. Many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. Clause 2 through 31, the bill is agreed.
I do now move, Mr. Chair, that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
Second. Being moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
No, that one is amended. No, that one was not amended. Yeah.
Many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The bill is agreed in its entirety.
Mr. Chairman, I do now move that the Speaker takes the chair.
Being moved and seconded that the Speaker takes the chair. Many members that are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise.
Holding the agreement.
The Speaker will now take the chair. I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the bill, making amendments thereto.
Honorable members, the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House has reported that the Committee of the Whole House has gone through the various bills, having made amendments thereto. Third reading and passing of bills. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we intend to move for a division of the House on this vote, but I do move for third reading and passing of a bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act to make provisions for the BH-1B work visa and the BH-4S permit, to provide for work visa exemptions and for connected matters thereto.
Thank you, honorable members. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a third time and pass. A bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act to make provisions for the BH-1B work visa and the BH-4S permit, to provide for work visa exemptions and for connected matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand.
After the vote, I'll ask for division.
The motion is carried.
Yeah, you're voting again.
Mr. Speaker, the motion has been carried, but again, as signaled, the government does ask for a division of the House.
Second. Greg, you'll have to explain you sent your staff off.
It has been requested and is now ordered that a division of the House be taken.
James Albury. Absent. Desmond Bannister. Carlton Bolag. Frankie Campbell. Shannon Dawn Cartwright. Reese Chipman. Chester Cooper. Dionisio de Aguila. Absent. Marvin Dames. Absent. Philip Davis. Chanel Ferguson. Ramal Ferreira. Absent. Ticeball Forbes. Absent. Michael Folks. Adrian Gibson. Glennis Hannah Martin. Darren Henfield. Mark Humes. Ellsworth Johnson. Hank Johnson. Aram Lewis. Jeff Lloyd. Ricky Markey. Frederick McAlpine.
Stay. Abstain.
Hubert Minnis. Hubert Minnis. Vaughn Miller.
Hurry up. Hurry up.
Pakeisha Parker Edgecombe. Michael Pintard. Ruben Ramming. Miriam Reckley Emmanuel. Travis Robinson. Renisha Rule. Bransel Rule. Dwayne Sands. Donald Saunders. Brent Simonet. Peter Turnquist. Renwood Wells.
Yes.
We got 19? We got... No. Only one. Honorable members, on the division of the House on a bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act to make provisions for the BH-1B work visa and the BH-4S permit to provide for work visa exemptions and for connected matters. The results are as follows. Yes, 19. No, 1. Abstain, 1. And 17 absent. Order that the bill be read at the third time pass. Order that the bill be read at the third time. Order that the bill be read for a third time and pass. Now to amend the Immigration Act to make provision for the BH-1B work visa and the BH-4S permit to provide for work visa exemptions and for connected matters. Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof be declared to be the Immigration Amendment Act 2019. Third reading and passing of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I move the third reading and passing of a bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for enhanced protection of minority investors, shareholder governance, and for matters connected thereto.
Second. He's no pillar. He's second.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a third time and pass. A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for enhanced protection of minority investors, shareholders governance, and for matters connected thereto. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a third time and pass. A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for enhanced protection for minority investors, shareholder governance, and for matters connected thereto. Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof be declared to be the Companies Amendment Act 2019. Further third reading and passing of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I move for third reading and passing of a bill for an act to amend the Securities Industries Act.
Second.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a third time and passed. A bill for an act to amend the Securities Industry Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a third time and pass.
A bill for an act to amend the Securities Industry Act.
Honorable members, it is hereby ordered that the following bill do now pass, and the title thereof be declared to be the Securities Industry Amendment Act 2019. Further third reading and passing of bills.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further third readings.
Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
No be good. Huh? Oh. Resolution. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Members' statements. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Centerville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be very quick. I just wanted to, Centerville would like to reiterate our request for the investment and the business model for the landfill and the port. And we also would like to request the tabling of the Memorandum of Understanding for the Antiquities, Monuments and Museum Corporation that I would have seen in the paper today. So if we could have those tabled, it will help. It would help. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. Member statements. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Baines and Grantstown.
I just rise to make the public aware and to invite my honorable colleagues this Saturday. The Baines and Grantstown community will be hosting our Music and Heritage Street Festival. And it's going to be from 1 p.m. to 12 midnight. And so I want to take this liberty to invite all of my colleagues and the wider community to come and to celebrate with the great people of Baines and Grantstown as we celebrate the goodness of our Lord after this Easter celebration, Easter weekend, and for individuals to have an opportunity to showcase their talents and artistic abilities throughout this event. Thank you, Mrs. Speaker. It's going to be in Baines and Grantstown, Meadow Street, from Blue Hill Road to Nassau Street. It's a massive festival, man. We do it big. That's correct. Bigger.
Thank you, honorable members. Honorable members, just before we proceed with further member statements, I just would like to bring to your attention, and I'd like to also express my sympathies to my predecessor as Speaker of this Honorable House, the 53rd Speaker, Dr. Kendall Major, on the passing of his father, G. Emerson Major. My information is that the funeral will be held this coming Sunday at Believers Gospel Chapel, 2 p.m., and the Believers Gospel Chapel is located on Prince Charles Drive, just east and opposite of the Elizabeth Estate Clinic. Further member statements. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Tall Pines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just rise to bring to the attention of constituents of Tall Pines and my colleagues that Tall Pines F&M Association will be having a South-South on Saturday. Faith Avenue, opposite the constituency community center and constituency office. Not at the center, opposite the constituency office, between the hours of 8 and 12 o'clock this Saturday, the fundraiser. Speaker, I also wish to advise the residents in the Strawns Hill subdivision area, and residents on Hamster Road and the Ponciana corner, Ponderosa Boulevard, sorry, that large garbage bins would be placed there this weekend for them to dispose of large items as a part of our Tall Pines cleanup campaign. So the area of Strawn's Hill subdivision and those small subdivisions in that area, and the area of Hamster Road and Ponderosa Boulevard. We would, Mr. Speaker, be doing this very same thing every week in Tall Pines for the next few weeks. So next week we'll make the announcements for the other subdivisions in terms of the cleanup project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Further member statement, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Golden Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be brief. Two things quickly. One is that we had a constituent from Sunshine Park, Mr. Gerald Charles McKenzie, or Charles Gerald McKenzie. A lot of people know him as Charles, some people know him as Gerald. He passed away suddenly just a week ago, and we want to offer heartfelt condolences to his wife and to his entire family. On another note, Mr. Speaker, this past Monday, Easter Monday, Golden Gates had two events, as we have been doing recently. Last year and this year, we had an Easter egg hunt in the morning, and we had a grill and chill in the afternoon for adults. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of the persons who made that possible. A lot of work went into having two events the same day, and a lot of logistics, and I really want to publicly thank all the persons who made it possible. And we were in the Golden Gates 1 subdivision area, and particularly on Pebbles Park, and we were happy to be there. The people came out in large numbers. The children did in the morning, and so did the residents all around the park, and it was a wonderful experience with the residents. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Yamacraw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first I would like to bring condolences to the family of MCM Oswald Munnings on the passing of his daughter. Mr. Munnings was a very good, close friend of my father. So I'm quite certain that all of my colleagues, led by the Honorable, Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, led by him, joins in extending condolences to the Munnings family. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to extend Easter greetings to the constituency of Yamacraw. I know that when we sent out our notice, a few persons said to me, hey, Easter's gone. And I had to remind them that Easter is really a season. You had the death, burial, and resurrection. And now we're moving towards celebrating the whole concept of Pentecost, and before that, the Ascension. So, Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to extend Easter greetings to the good constituency of Yamacraw, and to also let them know that on this coming Saturday between the hours of 3 and 5 on Australia Park in the area, it's Yamacraw, yes, in the Elizabeth Estates area. It borders Elizabeth Estates. We're going to be having an Easter egg hunt, and so we have invited the Elizabeth Estates Children's Home. And one other remark, I would like to congratulate Ms. Jessie P. Sanders. We had a constituency association meeting, and one of the things that the Prime Minister has mandated is that members of Parliament be at those meetings as often as, not as often as necessary, but that you be there to meet with your constituents and to answer and entertain questions, and most certainly to hear their advice and to solicit their constructive observation. But Ms. Jessie P. Sanders is one of the ladies in the community, one of the elder stateswomen in the community, and she expressed her dissatisfaction in us with all of the things that we're doing in Yamacraw, that we weren't sufficiently concentrating on the elderly. And so today I want to thank her for her kind advice and for participating in the meeting, and reassure her that we're on the job. And this coming Mother's Day, we will celebrate women in general, but there will be a specific focus on the women, on the more mature women in the society, who the good book says ought to teach our younger women. So we're going to have the younger women out serving them and expressing our appreciation and gratitude to and for them for all that they've done. So I say thank you very much, Ms. Jessie P. Sanders, and may God continue to bless you. Very good.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for West, Grand Bahama, and Bimini.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise as normal with regards to thanking many who continue to contribute to the building of our community. Just this past weekend, I am proud to say that the Homecoming Committee, led by local government in Bimini and chaired by one Mr. Lloyd Duda Edgecombe, would have done a tremendous job in attracting persons to our island to participate in that. I wish to thank them for their hard work, and also those tourists that would have come from as far as Germany and Bahamians from throughout the country who supported that event. Job well done for the Bimini Homecoming Committee. Also wish our youth of Grand Bahama congratulations. You know, just as lately we've been talking a lot about the Carifta team nationally, which did very, very well in the Caymans and Barbados. Among those were Terrence Jones, who competed in the under-20 category, and he would have attained the gold medal in the 400 meters, the silver in the 200 meters, and as a part of the 4x4 relay team, men's a bronze. He, along with Hiltronique Pinder, are both from West Grand Bahama, and I wish to commend both of them. Hiltronique did not medal at this particular time, but I am sure that she will in the near future, especially the 11 members of the swim team from Grand Bahama, all of whom I am advised received medals for participating in Carifta. And the athlete of that swim team would have been of the hour Marvin Johnson, who got 14 medals, all gold. And he is the son of Karen and Marvin Johnson. Karen, of course, being from West Grand Bahama. So we congratulate all those young people and continue to tell them to stay focused. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Garden Hills.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to lend my support and extending condolences to MCM Oswald Munnings. His daughter Meredith was a supporting member of the Garden Hills community and a good neighbor, and certainly a woman who tried her best to ensure that everything went well in Garden Hills. And so on behalf of my family, the good residents of the Garden Hills constituency, we say to MCM Munnings, God be with you and blessings and strengthen you as you go through this journey. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for this opportunity to be able to rise in this House. First of all, I want to thank the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on behalf of the Petty family in Governor's Harbor, you all have seen it fit that Emily Petty will be honored on the 3rd of May, 2019. History in the island of Eleuthera, where Governor's Harbor Primary School will now be named after Emily E. Petty in the great community of Governor's Harbor. I want to say to the Minister of Education and to the Prime Minister in particular, the people of Central Islands want to thank you for such a move and making sure that Emily Petty
just a minute, honorable member.
Capable of living out her dream.
We need to get control of that gadget, or we will take it. Carry on, honorable member.
With that being said, Ms. Emily Petty has been a lady of strength throughout the community of Governor's Harbor. She served to the entire island of Eleuthera just about in educating our young people. I'm happy that I've been one of her products. I also want to thank the good people of Rock Sound, that committee who came together last week and was able to pull off a massive homecoming in the Rock Sound community. That's what it's about, building communities. And to the residents in Jamestown who did likewise, you were able to come together, pool your resources, and you were successful over the Easter weekend. So I want to thank you, and again, I want to thank the Prime Minister and your cabinet for the renaming and the honoring of Emily Petty in the island of Eleuthera. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. There being no further member statement, honorable members, I just wish, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Speaker, very brief. I just want to send out a condolence message to MCM, also Munnings, on the death of his daughter. Munnings and I go way back, and it was very instrumental in me being here today. And I also want to send condolences out to the former speaker, whom I thought did an excellent job as speaker, even though he was browbeaten in many instances for certain decisions which he did not want to make. But I send condolences out to him and his family on the passing of his father. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Thank you very much, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Pinewood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on this occasion to put my chest out in pride and excitement over a young man in my constituency, Chaparral District, Israel Johnson. It's amazing when you could find positive role models who weren't intending themselves to be. Israel Johnson was a young man at the age of 14. In order to help make monies from to help his mom, started collecting stamps and coins. I think he got bit by the bug when one time he looked online and he realized how a piece of memorabilia sold for so much money. So he started buying and trading until it hit him that, hey, I'm selling my Bahamian history. So he began collecting. At this time, for the next month, starting from the April 17th to May 17th, his work is being exhibited as a part of a Vanguard collection at Central Bank. And I want to thank a wonderful man, Curator Ulrich Vargas. People know him for his work over the hill. I think you could find fewer people with the Bahamas at heart as that curator for providing an opportunity. Myself was there, the leader of opposition was there at the opening of that Vanguard series. We will be, as a community, arranging, we've sent invitations out to the schools to allow the school children to tour the exhibit as much as possible. Schools within Pinewood and nearby Pinewood. And we want to extend the highest possible regard. One honors that also stood out was Sir Dermot's family, his wife and daughter, actually also loaned for the exhibit the gold medal of Sir Dermot. And it's my understanding that was the first time that it actually came out of the house. At that meeting, we're so proud to see persons who have such a community heart. And you know, Sir Dermot and his family has always been those kind of persons. Despite their blessings, they've always been community-minded and people-centered. And they added that as a part of the exhibit for Israel Johnson. So we'll be doing a number of things. We'll be on Bahamas at sunrise because Pinewood has made the commitment to showcase all that is good in Pinewood. And again, I stand in this house to acknowledge, praise, and to bring to light the work of Israel Johnson, who, by the way, is also a boxer. And he will be helping us with our boxing program in the Pinewood community. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable members, there being no further member statement, I just wish to thank persons of the Nassau Village constituency. I would like to thank in particular Ms. Sandra Sajudis, Ms. Tanya Clinton Higgs. I'd like to thank my wife also, and I'd like to thank Ms. Vanessa Scott. They were the coordinators of our first after-school institute in the Nassau Village constituency. And at that institute, we had academic exercises where the BJC was taught, the GLAD grade 6 was taught. We had a handicraft a teaching
to teach young persons who were interested in that industry. That was principally led by Vanessa Scott. And on Saturdays, we want to thank BAMSI for their involvement in our backyard farming and agricultural training exercise. On Monday at 4 p.m., on the 29th of April, the After School Institute in Nassau Village will have its first commencement exercise at 4 p.m. on Taylor Street. And we're inviting all residents of Nassau Village to come out and to support your children, the future, the next generation in Nassau Village. And the second announcement, with respect to Hope Gardens, that's Polling Division 5 in Nassau Village, the proposal for the Hope Gardens Community Center will be discussed on Tuesday night, that is the 30th of April, at the Sadie Curtis Primary School, and members of security and justice will be in attendance, along with representative from the IDB, who will be discussing that proposal. So we're inviting, in particular, all the residents of Hope Gardens to come forward to attend that meeting, to air what concerns you may have with that proposal, because that is one of the requirements before we can move ahead. And I want to thank all persons who were involved in these two exercises to transform the constituency of Nassau Village as we move from the stigma of criminal activity to the glorious new beginning of life, and life more abundantly. Thank you. Appointments of select committees. Instructions to select committees. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I give notice of the following resolution. Whereas the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas entered into a heads of agreement dated 25th February 2002, the 2002 HOA, with Exuma Resort Development Limited, the purchaser, the company incorporated under and existing in accordance with the laws of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, for the purposes of a touristic development in Norman's Key, one of the keys in the Exuma range of keys, one of the islands of the said Commonwealth. And whereas the government entered into a superseding heads of agreement, with the purchaser on the 23rd April 2008, which supersedes and replaces the 2002 HOA, and whereas the agreement provides at clause 10.1 thereof that the government would seek to procure any acts, consents, and approvals of Parliament necessary or convenient under any statute law to effect the sale and lease and the grant of rights of way and easements, as the case may be, to the purchaser of over or in respect of all lands at Norman's Key intended to be sold or leased to the purchaser, or in respect whereof it is intended the purchaser should be granted any rights of way or easements, and whereas in anticipation of entering into the agreement with the purchaser, the government sought a resolution of both houses of Parliament pursuant to Section 273 of the Companies Act, Chapter 308, Statute Law of the Bahamas, revised edition of 2000, and Section 53A of the Ministry of Finance Act, Chapter 23, Statute Law of the Bahamas 2000, in order to satisfy the requirements set forth at Clause 10.1 of the agreement, and whereas by a resolution of the House of Assembly dated 10th March 2008 and of the Senate dated 13th March 2008, both houses of Parliament approved the sale by the Treasurer of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the Treasurer, of the fee simple of the hereditaments described in the schedule thereto, known as Norman's Key, and situated in the Exuma range of keys, one of the islands of the said Commonwealth, to the purchaser. And whereas on the 4th May 2012, the government entered into a first supplement to the agreement with the purchaser, which amended the agreement, and whereas by an indenture of conveyance dated 4th May 2012 and recorded in the Registry of Records in volume 11637 at pages 73 to 81, the Treasurer conveyed the contained herindiments specified therein to the purchaser pursuant to the amended agreement for a consideration of $1 million, the construction and development of the herindiments provided for in the agreement, other goods and valuable consideration, and the granting to the purchaser as developer of the rights of way and easements set forth in the third schedule to the agreement. And whereas pursuant to clause 4.2 of the agreement, the Treasurer will receive a preferred return equal to 5% of the gross sale proceeds received by the purchaser in connection with the sale to third parties of any real estate lot or any other residential lot located within the freehold lands, as such terms as defined in the agreement, such preferred returns to be paid to the Treasurer concurrently with the payment of applicable stamp duties on the conveyance of such residential lots to such third parties as part of the consideration for the conveyance of the said herindiments. And whereas by NEC 16, 1st May, Minute 1, the meeting, the National Economic Council, the Council, considered a memorandum by the Prime Minister, NEC 1534, and the Council agreed inter alia to grant of a right of way to the purchaser and its successor entitled over 3.861 acres of roadways detailed in the first schedule hereto, and more particularly delineated on the plan recorded in the Department of Lands and Surveys as Plan Number 599EX, attached hereto, and thereon colored green, subject to the purchaser meeting the requirements of the relevant government agencies. And whereas pursuant to the meeting, the Council also agreed to convey certain lands from the Treasurer to the purchaser and its subsidiary, N.C. Macduff's Limited, an international business company incorporated under and existing in accordance with the laws of the said Commonwealth, Macduff's. The Treasurer shall convey 8.488 acres of land in total as follows. 1. Freehold conveyance to the purchaser and its successors in title of 2.304 acres, detailed in the second schedule hereto, and more particularly delineated on the attached plan recorded in the Department of Lands and Surveys as Plan Number 600EX, attached hereto and thereon colored orange. 2. Freehold conveyance to the purchaser and its successors in title of 3.179 acres, detailed in the third schedule hereto, and more particularly delineated on the plan recorded in the Department of Lands and Surveys as Plan Number 602EX, attached hereto and thereon colored pink. And 3. Freehold conveyance to Macduff's of 3.005 acres, detailed in the fourth schedule hereto, and more particularly delineated on the plan recorded in the Department of Lands and Surveys as Plan Number 598EX, attached hereto and thereon hatched green. And whereas in exchange for the conveyance of the said 8.488 acres of land, the Treasurer shall receive the freehold of 8.617 acres of land, more particularly delineated on the plan recorded in the Departments of Lands and Surveys as Plan Number 598EX, attached hereto and thereon colored blue, colored yellow, and hatched orange. And whereas on 31st May 2017, pursuant to the International Persons Landholding Act, Chapter 140, the Investment Board granted permission for the purchaser to acquire the herindiments listed in the second and third schedules hereto, and for N.C. Macduff's Limited to acquire the herindiments listed in the fourth schedule hereto, and whereas to complete the agreed land transactions and exchanges, the Treasurer desires to convey parcels of land and grant the rights of way and easements to the purchaser as detailed in the schedule hereto below, and whereas pursuant to both sections 273 of the Companies Act, Chapter 308, and Section 53A of the Ministry of Finance Act, Chapter 23, the Treasurer shall not sell or make any other disposition of the fee simple of the said hereinditiments without the prior approval of both Houses of Parliament, signified by resolution thereof. Now, therefore, be it resolved that pursuant to Section 273 of the Companies Act, Chapter 308, and Section 53A of the Ministry of Finance Act, Chapter 23, and in consideration of the purchase price specified in the agreement as amended, which said consideration shall be reflected in any other document necessary to consummate the transactions contemplated hereby and entered into between the Treasurer and the purchaser and or N.C. Macduff's Limited, this House approves the 1, grant of a right-of-way over the hereinditiments listed in the first schedule hereto, 2, sale by the Treasurer to the purchaser of the fee simple of the hereinditiments listed in second and third schedules hereto, and 3, sale by the Treasurer to N.C. Macduff's Limited of the fee simple of the hereinditiments listed in the fourth schedule hereto. Oh, praise the Lord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the notice be brought up.
Cruel and inhumane treatment.
Order that the notice do lie on the table. Further notices for future meetings. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to renew all matters in the name of the government and signals, Mr. Speaker, that the House will adjourn until 10 a.m. May 1st, Wednesday, 2019.
Second, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that he indicated. Honorable Member for Bamboo Town, the motion for adjournment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House adjourns until 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 1st of May, 2019.
Second. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House adjourns to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 1st of May. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Final adjournment. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House adjourns.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House adjourns to the 1st of May, 10 a.m., Wednesday, the 1st of May. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The House stands adjourned to Wednesday, 10 a.m., 1st of May.